Yeah, hi everyone, we are back again. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those who joined us from across the world. I'm Manish Krishnan, Head of Marketing here at QKS Group. I welcome you all to today's session on From Pipeline Visibility to Revenue Predictability, what CROs must fix in 2026. Once again, thank you all for joining us. For years, pipeline visibility has been central to how CROs manage sales performance and forecasted growth. But in 2026, organizations are realizing that visibility alone does not guarantee predictable revenue. Despite having more CRM, more data, dashboards, and pipeline insights than ever before, many businesses still struggle with forecast inaccuracies, data slippage, and deal slippage, and inconsistent outcomes. The challenge today is not the lack of data, but rather is a gap between visibility and execution discipline. Well, in today's session, we'll explore why traditional pipeline metrics are falling short, how buyer behavior and execution gap impact revenue predictability, and what CROs must rethink to move the passive visibility to active execution ownership. Well, I'm pleased to introduce you to today's speakers. Umang Thakur, Vice President, Research and Consulting. We have Aaron Andrews, Associate Director, and Vaishnavi, Senior Analyst here at QKS Group. Well, together, they will share practical insights on how revenue leaders can strengthen execution rigor and build more predictable revenue engines in 2026. We encourage all of you to raise any questions that you may have throughout the session in the Q&A section below, and we'll surely address them towards the end of the session. With that, let's get started and over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Anish. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Anish, if you could just move to the next slide.
Yeah.
All right. So before we dive into the deep end, I wanted to take a quick moment to look at our roadmap for today. So we've broken this discussion into 5 core pillars, and they're designed to take us from the problems we are facing right now all the way to real actionable solutions. So first, we're going to look at defining the breakdown. This is where we look under the hood at why traditional pipeline visibility just isn't working anymore. And we'll break down the hidden traps that misled the teams into thinking their deals are healthy when they're actually at risk. Next, we'll move into defining the predictability. Once we get past the basic dashboard illusions, we'll be defining what true revenue looks like today. We'll explore what it takes to build a modern, productive engine. From there, we'll move to defining the execution. Now, this is where we're going to look honestly at execution, discipline, and ownership, and ask a tough question, among others, is your team actively managing a deal execution, or are you just assuming everything is fine because the dashboard looks green? We'll also look at some of the latest advancements in the SalesTech that are helping teams refine how they execute. Fourth, we'll share Analyst recommendations and best practices. We're going to do a walkthrough to the latest expert recommendations and practical frameworks. These are the exact tactical strategies that we believe that high-performing teams need or are deploying right now to stop pipeline decay and take control of the forecast. And finally, we'll wrap up with the key questions CROs must answer. We'll conclude with a direct diagnostic health check. We'll put together a list of key questions designed to challenge your current operating standards and help you audit whether your team is truly ready for the year ahead. So with that, let's start with the pillar 1. Anish, if you could just move to the next slide. So I'll be covering the visibility illusion, and my colleague will be covering the execution gap here. Next slide. Thank you. All right. So, let's talk about a major trap that almost every sales leader falls into at some point. It's what I like to call the visibility illusion. Right now, chief revenue officers have more data than ever before. And if you look at their screens, they can track pipeline coverage, CRM stages, what their reps are doing every day, and endless historical reports. But here's the problem. Having a mountain of data isn't the same as having actual insights. When CROs look at their dashboards, they think they're looking at real pipeline visibility, bulletproof forecast, accurate deals, and probably predictable revenue. But if you strip away the pretty charts, what do they actually have? They have activity tracking, which is essentially knowing that a rep sent an email, but not if it actually moved the needle. They have backward-looking reports, deal stages based entirely on reps' gut feeling, and a bunch of lagging indicators. So the biggest mistake organization make is simple. They mistake seeing a pipeline for understanding a pipeline. Just because a CRO has a full dashboard doesn't mean they know what's going to happen this quarter. Anish, if you could just move to the next slide. So in this slide, I'm going to talk about why visibility fails. So, I'm going to talk about why does this visibility fail CROs when they need it most. So it usually comes down to three big issues: false confidence, misalignment, and lagging indicators. First of all, there is the concept of false confidence. A CRO would see a 3 to 5 times pipeline coverage ratio and thinks, great, we are safe. But the big number doesn't tell anything, tell them anything about the deal quality, whether the buyer actually feels any urgency, if the executives are on board, or if the deal is even likely to close. The second second issue, I would say, is the massive misalignment. Now, CRM stages don't map to how buyers actually buy. In most companies, a deal moves forward just because a meeting happened, or because a rep checked a box in the CRM. It doesn't move forward because the buyer secured a budget, or got the team aligned, or actually committed to a change. So CROs end up tracking what their sellers are doing. They're now not what their buyers are doing. Finally, we are looking at the rearview mirror. Traditional forecasting relies on old data, past conversation rates, and historical patterns. Because of this, these systems miss the silent deal killers, before it's too late. They don't spot when a deal is losing steam, when a key stakeholder stops replying, or when a competitor sneaks in. So at the end of the day, visibility is not the same thing as predictability. Anish, next slide.
So when we've had conversation with CROs, all our analysts at QK's group, the problem that they're trying to solve is not necessarily a lack of activity. It is the disconnect between frontline activity and actual revenue outcomes. And this is what we refer to as the execution gap. For a long time, sales management models have heavily optimized around measurable activity metrics, things like outreach, volume, number of calls, meetings booked, touches per rep, etc. Now, this is easy, and this is the reason it has happened is because it's quite understandable. Activity is visible, it's measurable, and easy to operationalize at scale. But the issue here is high activity does not automatically translate to high quality execution. Again, as Umang talked about, a seller can send more emails, book more meetings, still fail to move a deal forward effectively. Because execution quality is a very different layer altogether. It measures how well sellers communicate value, how effectively they align with buyer priorities, and how well they navigate competitive positioning. Ultimately, how successfully they progress buyer decision-making. And this is where many organizations are beginning to realize now that there is a gap between being operationally busy and being commercially effective. So now this creates what we also call the coaching divide. Frontline coaching tends to focus heavily on improving productivity levels, increasing activity levels for reps, increasing pipeline coverage, meeting counts, the same metrics. But far less emphasis is placed on improving execution effectiveness itself. So what are sellers doing? Are they asking the right questions in these meetings? Are they identifying the right stakeholders to engage with? And are they fixing stakeholder alignment issues effectively? Are they recognizing deal risk signals early on? And are they then readjusting their strategies around that? Are they guiding buyers effectively through the decisioning process, giving them the right timely communication, timely information at the right point? Because without that layer of inspection and guidance, coaching becomes heavily activity-centric rather than outcome-centric. And as a result, organizations often end up with what looks like strong sales motion on the surface, but very little actual momentum underneath. Teams appear highly productive. Again, as Umang said, dashboards will look healthy. But Activities are happening constantly. Still, leadership struggles with stalled deals, inconsistent forecasts, low conversion efficiency, and just unpredictability in revenue outcomes. A major reason for this is the lack of visibility into the real world buying decision-making dynamics, which can be resolved quite easily. And organizations historically had strong visibility into seller activity, but limited visibility into buyer progression. So what we're now seeing across the market, the sales tech market, is a broader shift from activity management towards execution governance, enabling CROs and sales managers to get into this with greater detail, using data, and better data, better analytics, better AI. Leading CROs want more structured deal inspections, stronger operational mechanisms to ensure that frontline execution quality is repeatable, and it's repeatable across teams, across different geographies, product lines, everything, and success can be replicated. We'll look at all that in more detail soon. Next slide, Anish. And do you want to take this up?
Yes, thank you, Vaishnavi. The next area we wanted to cover was defining the predictability. Something that we've alluded to, Umang did, and Vaishnavi alluded to as well, is that some of these systems, they need to have a predictable nature because a lot of them have this backward-looking nature that we've all traditionally become quite accustomed to, unfortunately. But really, what I want to focus on is there's three key areas here, is that the beyond the forecast, these dashboards and static CRM metrics, which only tell, quite frankly, historical perspective. They don't really unlock the events that are happening currently, or even looking beyond, ahead in a data signal driven fashion. And I'll cover that in just a moment. And the second area is the role of the real-time buyer intelligence in deal outcomes. This is highly important because it's directly impacting the decision-making process that many CROs have and those on their team that need to make those daily decisions and what's going to happen operationally within their organization. And then lastly, the measuring of the execution quality, and it's just not around that pipeline health anymore, as Umang alluded to earlier. I'm going to dig into a little bit more into that. If you can go to the next slide, please. And so what do I mean by that? So in the central area, we see this active deal. And something I want to highlight at the very top that's critically important to what I'm going to cover here in just a moment is that the deal didn't change in the CRM. The market changed around it. And what I mean by that is this notion of the static data that exists inside CRM. We can no longer rely on that for a forward-looking decision-making and activities that need to happen. So in further, CRM systems, as we've alluded to in the technology stack that we've been evaluating, they should not be operating in an isolation from other systems. They need to be receiving signals and giving output to other systems so that all the teams can be aware of what's happening. And why is this important? Well, they summarize what teams believe will happen and that static nature of these dashboards and these CRM metrics that are static in a way. They really summarize what teams believe will happen, but rather they should be revealing whether deals are actually on track to close. And as buying processes become increasingly dynamic, static views of this pipeline, they really can fall flat. They don't reflect the reality of what's happening in motion here. And like I said, it leaves leadership either uninformed and really not in control of what's happening. And the limitations of these forecasts are just traditionally have been sort of a mixture of experience and historical data and sort of a guesswork that's going on, and really doesn't reflect what's really happening out in the market and the buyer signals that are coming in from all different directions. So really, organizations need to evaluate deal health based on those signals that are happening throughout different stage progressions. And they really need to reflect and redefine what buyers actually need. And what do I mean by that? So for example, take retail. A deal may be progressing normally, or what we think is normally in a traditional CRM sense, and it has strong engagement. Maybe the reps and other teams are putting in information, but this really doesn't reflect the reality. For example, say a new local event pops up, such as a festival or a big sporting event. or new regional trends, and they can shift demand patterns across local stores. And that's the reality that's happening then. And how well can a company respond to that quickly changing reality that's going on? Or if they find out about a local event that's coming up a couple of months ahead of time, they can be more proactive in addressing what's coming instead of reactive. So that's the nature of where we're trying to head. Additionally, maybe there's a change in seasonality as far as the weather patterns that could affect, summer cold that's coming through, and that could change what buyers are interested in as far as, their clothing, heavy coats, or maybe they want to shift to something cooler because of the hot weather that's going on. So again, shifts in the buying behavior can really impact those things. Now, the role of the real-time buyer intelligence is the fact that it becomes the foundation of how deals are understood. Instead of relying on what's originally scoped or expected, it allows organizations to really track how buyer intent evolves, just as an example in the retail. Additionally, there's some impacts across industries that can create new opportunities or expose things that are gaps within processes or gaps within the realization of that static information. Oh, wow, we're missing critical information. And now we're becoming reactive instead of proactive. Another example here in industry changes is, say, healthcare. There's an outbreak of sickness that's happening because of seasonal viruses going around or what have you, and that can rapidly shift priorities for hospitals and medical centers as far as supplies that they have on hand to meet that increased sudden surge in demand there. And additionally, this could be seen as an operational inefficiency if they don't have that. But if they're more proactive, that shifts now from inefficiency to an efficiency pattern. And so they are perceived in the market as being ahead of the curve, and that those buying signals and those surge of other signals are really bringing information in that these companies can operationally be proactive for and meet the demand ahead of time. And by recognizing those signals, they can reposition themselves ahead of competitors, because the competitors are looking out for that same information. And so if this company is not positioned correctly, then the competitors are going to, gobble up that chance and gobble up that revenue that could be there. The last area of measuring execution quality and not just that pipeline health. Yeah, it looks like it's a healthy pipeline. There's a lot of information being input by different teams, but that's not the actual reality of what's going on and not the true quality of that. Yes, there may be volumes of information put in there, but that doesn't have a clear indication of the quality of what's going on. And when those demand signals are clear, outcomes will still depend on how well teams can execute on those things. Pipeline alone doesn't determine success. It's the execution quality that determines the outcomes of those opportunities. For example, say we have in manufacturing, buying signals indicate that customers are shifting their preferences toward maybe a modified version of an existing product. They're saying, well, wow, I love this product, but what if I can get it into a different color or a different size of something? It's really maybe not a brand new opportunity, but it unlocks a newer opportunity off of an existing one. So how well an organization can be proactive about those signals coming in and those indicators that, wow, buyers are really interested in this product, but maybe we should offer different preferences. So being adaptable to that feedback can really unlock opportunities for organizations as they meet these demands that are coming in. Really, the bottom line in all of this information is predictability isn't really about better forecasting. It's really about responding faster to the signals that change when what buyers actually are needing. On to the next slide there. That was the final point that I wanted to add. So there it is. So on to the next one there. Thank you.
It's exactly right what Aaron said. And usually buyers will give you very early on indication of when they are leaning towards competitors, what sort of specific needs that they have that you can adapt to and you can center around to sell your product. And they often give you a lot of indications quite early on and in conversations, in email responses and all engagement channels, through all engagement channels that we open with buyers. So that's what we're looking into now. The execution part is where we interact with the buyer and we get a lot of insights. So against this backdrop, what Umang and Aaron have said, the next question becomes what exactly is the shift CROs are wanting to move into. At a high level, the market is moving away from visibility alone into, I guess, deal movement towards true execution ownership. The shift is now toward deal level accountability, because at a deal level, buyer dynamics can be very different from one deal to the other, where leaders want far deeper insight into how deals are progressing, where execution gaps might exist, and also what actions are influencing outcomes specifically. At the same time, we are also seeing movement away from fragmented sales tools and disconnected data environments towards more unified buyer intelligence and execution layers to help fill this gap. And finally, organizations are shifting from pure activity tracking towards a more outcome-driven execution. And sales tech is increasingly expected to guide decisions now and improve execution quality, directly support revenue predictability, including with all the factors that are there. So the next major shift happening, we like to call it the visibility upgrade. So it's across sales organizations and the CRM metrics that provided operational visibility, but mostly into seller activity and not necessarily buyer progression. That's probably where the gap exists. So today, CROs want deeper insight into what is actually happening within every deal itself. They want to understand buyer alignment. They want to understand buyer priorities. They want to understand stakeholder engagement in a B2B context, especially. Who are the different stakeholders, how engaged they are, because buying teams can be very, very difficult to crack it. There can be a gatekeeper there that you want to target. Execution quality has to be measured, and whether real momentum is building inside the opportunity has to be measured. A deal can look healthy in the CRM, absolutely, because most of that is subjective data, but the buyer side may actually be slowing down or losing alignment. And this can happen quite silently in the background without an awareness that the seller might have, who's very busy in a lot of different areas. So the shift here is from simply monitoring pipeline movement towards inspecting deal quality and buyer progression more directly. And that is ultimately what's driving the move towards deal level accountability. Next slide. The next slide, Anish. Yeah, the sales tech market is shifting from disconnected point solutions towards integrated revenue execution ecosystems.
I do see, just to add on here, I do see a lot of quotes being added. It'd be great if you guys can share it to our audience, because I'm curious to know what it is exactly. Right?
Yeah. So this quote explains what is shifting in sales tech specifically. Sales tech has to shift to align with evolving CRO priorities. So which is what we see here with the value loop. Over here, we see that enablement, engagement, and intelligence are seen as three major pillars, because a seller has to have the right training, coaching, guidance, content, and everything available at his fingertips, everything available to nurture them properly so that they can then nurture buyer relationships well. And that is where engagement comes in. You have to ensure timely engagement. You have to ensure that sellers are communicating value in a very concrete way, in a way that actually creates impact, just the right information that the specific buyer needs, versus just a plethora of information that's already available to them, specifically targeting them with what they need. Intelligence comes in when we're actually measuring what this engagement is looking like and how it's progressing the deal, whether the certain content is more effective than the other, whether certain messaging is more effective, what are the leaders doing, what are the sales executives that are sales executives, account managers that are really excelling doing differently. Do we have enough intelligence to measure that, back that up, and present that back into the enablement structure so that we can learn from our own mistakes, but then also from our own good strategies and things that are working out for us. So this value loop indicates that link between the process and the technology, how these three pillars of technology are getting combined now in sales tech to enable the revenue team's needs are met. We are making sure we have new customer acquisition. We are retaining our customers, like Aaron mentioned. Is there scope for upselling? Is there scope for expansion in some way? And we're also having customers' need in mind, because their engagement is tracked so well. We are able to give them a more personalized experience and impactful communication. And the service part comes in later, but it is closely tied to sales excellence. And it is a byproduct of this entire process happening smoothly, because then the service team knows where there are gaps and what to improve. So this is the value loop that we have developed here at QK's Group, just to kind of demonstrate how the process is resulting in evolving sales tech as well. So yeah, from activity tracking to outcome-driven execution with sales tech. We'll look more into this now, because modern sales tech is bridging these gaps, basically. So I'll just go through this pretty quickly, because it's a lot of information, but any attendee that is interested, we can share this infographic. This will be there probably on our website as well. Do look into this. There's a lot of insights, and it's especially insightful for CROs trying to understand what process change matches with the gap they're experiencing, and which technology can really enable them to fix those gaps. But if I have to quickly go through it, I just have to say that the market is moving from enabling seller activity towards a holistic, like I mentioned, engagement, enablement, intelligence, execution, unified execution. So what CROs now need to do is they need to have the ability to understand whether deals are progressing correctly and actually moving forward, where risks exist, and how teams can intervene early. So that shift is driving convergence, and what we are constantly between enablement, engagement, and forecasting intelligence, rather. So what we are seeing across the market, the sales tech market, is there is a pattern here. There's an operational gap, and organizations evolve processes to address that gap. Sales tech platforms have been very rapidly emerging to meet that gap. So yeah, sales execution today, it still varies significantly across reps and managers. So to reduce these inconsistencies, organizations are implementing more standardized qualification and deal inspection framework, so that we get that deal level intelligence. And with that deal level intelligence, we can have guided selling that is implemented. AI-driven next best actions can be recommended based on deal dynamics. And many organizations, as you know, have strong visibility into seller activity, but actual buyer progression is still a mystery. So the market is shifting really from activity tracking to buyer engagement inspection, using engagement analytics. Like I mentioned, engagement, when you have so much insights into the engagement and dynamics that are going on, how many emails, how many SMSs have worked, how much of LinkedIn messaging has worked, everything in one platform, you get a more holistic view into the intelligence of what is working, what messaging, what channels, what mix is working. And it's kind of a marketing lens to sales, bringing a little bit of that here as well. So like I mentioned before, coaching is a very important aspect in sales. Coaching is continuous, it's dynamic, and historically somewhat manager dependent. And when a manager does not have bandwidth, coaching kind of stalls. But coaching has to be constant, dynamic, and every seller has to evolve basically and learn on the job, learn very quickly. So now organizations are embedding continuous coaching directly into live execution workflows through the emergence of conversational intelligence. Every customer conversation is a treasure trove of a lot of information about the deal. So that is what is emerging. Enablement is going through a transition. It's again become part of that value loop where enablement, engagement, and intelligence are all overlapping. So instead of operating separately from active listening, enablement is becoming embedded directly into deals and conversations, again, through next best actions, guided execution, and modern revenue enablement platforms. Forecasting is also moving beyond rep judgment and CRM stage progression, because organizations increasingly recognize now that these stages alone are somewhat weak indicators of real deal health. And as a result, companies are adopting signal-based forecasting models that use engagement, execution, buying signals to assess momentum and risk more dynamically. AI can also come into picture here. AI can give you in-depth insights of where a deal is stalled, why it is stalled, and whether there's been any stalled activity that's resulting in the lead getting cold, things like that. So yeah, I think I will move past this. The rest of the information is just that SalesTech is increasingly becoming designed not just to record activity, but it's designed now to continuously inspect, guide, and optimize execution quality itself across the revenue life cycle. And this, of course, with this, what's happening is we have a lot more data to base our intelligence on, to base our forecasting on, to base our decisions on. So everything is evolving together and holistically. So SalesTech is really enabling in that. Next slide, please.
So what's next for CROs? We've unpacked a lot of information here, and I'm going to cover a little bit more in here. But really, the next couple of areas we wanted to dive into and is the execution ownership best practices, and I'll kind of break that apart into a loop here. And there's some key questions we wanted to cover with all of you that are joining us today. Is really as challenge questions to ask yourself, ask your teams, so that you can see if you are really getting the best out of the systems that you're using. Are you really getting the best information signals in, and are you able to execute on that information that is coming in to you? So next slide. So really there exists these three pillars, but really it operates in a loop here. So this execution ownership mindset is that in order to operationalize and execute on the data that you're receiving. So Vaishnavi highlighted the sales tech is receiving a lot of information coming in, and how you execute on that really speaks volumes of how well your team is operating, how decision making is progressing, and how well the company can be proactive and sometimes reactive, but more proactive in the future. And what we're seeing here on the left-hand side is the operational. We operationalize the buyer intelligence. So all those signals and all that data coming in really needs to be something done with it. What are you going to execute on? And really owning that data in such a way to now you can say, this data means this information, and this set of data means this information, and this is how we're going to act upon what we're seeing. And those key elements that are in there, and I alluded to some of those earlier in the examples, those buyer signals, decision momentum, stakeholder alignment, those in the internal team that are making sure everyone is aware of what's happening and they have access to the information they need. Deal inspection, looking at that more closely to see what's really happening underneath and not just on the surface. And then unlocking coaching rhythms. And a lot of sales technology really does enable teams to be able to do that and become better in their next deal, or better to answer questions that come through, or better spot trends as they pop up and get ahead of those things. So the action here is activate buyer intelligence, not just let it sit there and become idle, but what can we do around that? And this gives better signals into the forecasting and, like I said, the coaching. And the bottom line here is that this feeds execution standards and deal rigor. So instead of just doing our next best guess of what's going to happen with this deal, we now have better information to make better decisions, and we can establish standards and guidelines across the organization that everyone understands and realizes what we do when we do receive this information in. And then it sets up that deal rigor, so that way we can have better deal outcomes for the customer and for the company alike. And then that shifts into the next column of the enforcing the execution discipline. What's that repeatable cycle that we can go through now that we have all these data signals coming in? And like I said, establishing those standards, being ready for the next deal that comes in that looks similar to another deal, but slight nuanced differences now that we're receiving new signal information. Inspection checkpoints, those check-ins, from the managers with a team, or the team is inspecting those deals more regularly. And consistent coaching, so not just the coaching rhythm of how often it's happening. Well, now we can establish standards to say, okay, this type of coaching is working. How can we continue that and have consistency around that? And then that obviously puts in execution quality, something that we talked about earlier as far as the quality of outcomes and not just the volume of the information that we have. And like I said, the action here is to enforce execution discipline through standardization deal criteria. Now that's built into a lot of these systems. We can build criteria and in processes as far as the operations across the organization. And then the bottom line here is that it creates measurable, repeatable execution patterns. So now that we have this data coming in, we have standardized baseline across the organization, we can then get KPIs and metrics of how well we are operating as an organization to see what's working, what's not working, what teams need to improve. Are there opportunities for teammates to coach one another in certain instances because they have this higher expertise in maybe one industry versus another? The last column there is to build a performance framework. So now that we've unlocked this intelligence, we're starting to standardize things across the organization. Now we're going to build this framework so that way it can be adjustable should there be shifts in the market, shifts in how our company needs to move, maybe a new product or service is coming in, maybe there's a new acquisition. How well can we incorporate those new things into this framework? And so that we can have better outcome impact, buyer decision progress now is better. That cause and effect is more in play because we can see the cause of what's happening and the effect of what's happening through these buying signals. And we can have conversion predictability more frequently. And we can link those sales actions to the revenue outcomes instead of just guessing and saying, out of these 100 deals, we think we're going to close, 75, and our best guess is they're going to hit our revenue with this percentage. Now we can have a higher predictability close to that 100. Our revenue outcomes are more predictable that the business can rely on. And then we can see in future goals that are set by the organization are now reachable because we have better data and information. And so the bottom line here is that this really refines our buyer intelligence and sharpens our intervention at the right stages. And then this feeds back into the first column. So it becomes this nice loop that the company can perform and act upon. Next slide here. So that brings us to this next section, and something I alluded to is really, these aren't questions for us that are sharing this information with you and the insights that we have to really answer. It's for you to be challenged by these questions and to ask yourself and have your teams ask these questions to really understand, are we getting the most out of our sales technology that we have? Is that sales technology receiving the right signals for us to make decisions upon? So in the left-hand column, there's really this revenue truth versus revenue perception that really has to be answered. Do we really understand which deals will close and why? Not just our next best guess. And do we have the information to really understand that question? Are our forecasts based on pipeline data or buyer reality? Again, pipeline information is not enough many times. So what are the other signals telling us? Which deals look healthy in CRM but show warning signs in buyer engagement? And how confident are we that our forecasts reflect execution readiness and not just optimism? We hope they're going to work out. Umang, I think you're going to go to the next one there.
Right. So I'll take that up. So you know what, this brings us to the second core theme of 2026, which is the execution discipline and ownership. Now, revenue leaders have to move away from a culture of assuming execution is happening just because a deal is moving through the CRM. And they have to move towards a culture of managing it with absolute discipline. So the questions that we have for you today is, first, the question that you need to ask is, can we identify execution gaps early enough to actually intervene? Now, think about your current state. When an enterprise deal goes sideways, do you find out at week 4 of the quarter when there is still time to salvage it, or do you find it at in week 11, when the forecast suddenly collapses? So if your visibility doesn't allow you to course correct in real time, you aren't really managing a pipeline. You're just documenting a loss. The next question is, how consistently do our sales team execute winning behaviors? Now, every organization has top performers who execute flawlessly by instant, but a predictable revenue engine cannot rely on few heroes. So do you know that your winning playbook looks like in data signals? And more importantly, is it being executed consistently across bottom 60% of your core reps? Which brings us to the third question. Do we have a definitive standard for how deals should be run, inspected and advanced? Now, if I walked into your office today and imagine asked 3 different sales managers what constitutes a healthy stage 3 deal, would I get the exact same criteria without a unified objective standard for deal inspection? Managers end up inspecting based on gut feel rather than verified by milestones. The final question that we have to ask in this particular section would be who owns the deal execution when outcomes fall short? Is it the rep, is it the manager, or is it the system? So when a number is missed, where does the buck stop? If we blame the rep, we ignore coaching. If we blame the manager, we ignore data. But in 2026, the answer has to be the system. If your revenue operating system allows bad data, poor behaviors, and unaligned deals to break your forecast, it is the system we must fix. Back to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Umang. And this last column is really important as it ties into the others. This is notion from going from pipeline management to this outcome control. And something that I've often seen is that in this first question is here, are we managing our pipelines or driving outcomes? Often people get caught up in just making the pipelines look pretty because they filled in some information, they checked off checkboxes, they've filled in certain fields and maybe moved things along through a stage progression in an opportunity cycle. Maybe that's them just looking busy, but is that really driving the outcome of closing the deal? These are hard questions that you really need to ask. There's an old analogy that I've seen before where there was this library that people walked into, and the person managing the library was just caught up in the notion of organizing the books in such a way to where it was easy to find the books. Maybe they're organized in, by author or by category, but they never read the books. So they didn't have a true understanding of what the information that was contained within the books. So just like this, are we just managing our pipeline to make it look nice and it's organized, but are we really understanding the data that's inside those or the other signals that are coming in? Which sales activities are actually, advanced buyer decisions and which ones are really creating noise out there? Is there one that we need to drop? Is it a duplicate from another one? Are we communicating with our teammates to really understand that there's a potential for us to work together to close a deal because there's something very similar at an existing company? And can we clearly link frontline sales actions to revenue results across the funnel? As I alluded to earlier, say we have those 100 deals and we think 75 of them might close based on sort of gut reaction or some experience, but no actual data. What we're really wanting to say is out of those 100 deals, can we link it directly to true revenue outcomes? And we know we've closed it and we can have high degree of confidence that they will close based on a lot of these signals and our involvement in executing those upon that data. And then lastly, are we optimizing for pipeline growth or for just predictable conversion? So we've got to identify those patterns that could exist. And for pipeline growth, there could be not just identifying risk, but something I alluded to earlier was the signal of buyers are looking for maybe a new option of a product that you already have, maybe in a different color or different size. So that pipeline growth could come from just listening to what's going on in the feedback of, the opportunity here says it could be this revenue or this amount in the sales, but it could be a lot larger if we listen to what's happening in the buying signals, and that could change the outcomes is from that unknown and best guess of what's going on to really a predictable outcome and converting that to closing and really boosting our sales. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anish.
Thank you, guys. Well, it was a quick session. I was expecting something more from your end, but I'm sure that there is a second part to come into it, right, Umang?
Yeah.
Right. So we do have a couple of questions from our audience. So the first question being, what the biggest mindset shift that CROs need to take to stop relying on what their pipeline says and start acting on what their buyers are actually signaling? Who wants to take this up?
I can take that one. This mindset shift, it's really this notion that in a traditional sense, we've all become accustomed to traditional CRM systems and the dashboards and the KPIs and the pretty charts and what that information is telling us in a backward-looking fashion. And unfortunately, that's impacted the way we think about how we view the data, how we create action upon that data and our decision-making and what those outcomes are. So this mindset shift becomes from a traditional backward-looking sense to the reality of what's happening now and how it's shaping the future. And we can become, like I said earlier, more proactive. So that mindset shift has to happen within not only leadership, but the teams that are actually managing the pipeline and using this sales tech to help them with their day-to-day activities, to say, I'm not just checking a checkbox for the sake of doing this, but I'm also digging into why did I check that checkbox? Is it because of this information I received from these buying signals coming in from other systems, periphery systems that are coming in? Is it feedback loop that's coming in from customer service teams that's coming saying, wait a minute, this product has a flaw? Or maybe, like I said earlier, maybe there's a new product opportunity that could exist because people like the product, but maybe they just want something different. So it's a shift in the traditional sense to a more modern sense of what these sales tech systems can really unlock for CROs and their teams, and really what they can actually execute upon in a more standardized, known outcome way versus just somewhat mixed with somewhat of the data and then some experience and then a gut feeling. So getting away from that into more of a predictable outcome.
Thanks for answering that, Aaron. The next question seems a bit more interesting, especially the fact being Vaishnavi kept repeating the fact that sales tech is enabling, right? Now, with that, can great enablement alone solve the execution gap? I think that's a great question. Vaishnavi, do you want to take that up?
Sure, Anish, I'll take that up. So, great enablement is definitely a critical part of the solution, but by itself, it's just not enough anymore because most organizations are already providing enough training materials and training guides and guidebooks and playbooks and a lot of jargon about methodologies and how to use content effectively. But the bigger challenge is just ensuring that this guidance is somewhat more consistently applied during a live deal execution scenario. So this is where the sales tech market is really focusing on. And organizations just want enablement to move beyond these periodic training sessions now. They want it to be embedded directly into seller day-to-day workflows. So instead of sellers learning something once, trying to remember it later, modern platforms are just providing contextual guidance now during live or actual conversations or during engagement opportunities, whether it is asynchronous or synchronous opportunities. Deal inspections, forecasting reviews, buyer interactions, all of this is empowered now with a lot more contextual guidance. In many ways, the industry is it's shifting from enablement as a knowledge delivery aspect towards enablement as execution reinforcement. So that's why technologies like conversational intelligence has come up and AI-enabled next best actions, guided selling, AI-assisted coaching has come up, pitch practice, live role play practice, all AI-enabled. They're becoming so important just in order to fill this gap. So alongside good enablement, getting that intelligence from what's happening is very crucial. That's my answer.
Yeah, you just mentioned some time back that when a manager is not good enough, the coaching stalls. Right, that's exactly where this comes in, I believe. Now, moving on to the next question, there is someone asking regarding, is sales tech becoming too complex for sales teams these days? Who wants to take this? I think this is a common question which is coming in.
Yeah, I'll start off, and I think Vaishnavi can add into this, is that It's a great question because in a sense, sometimes complexity can be perceived in two different ways, meaning we have this system that has a lot of things that it can do as far as functionality, and that can become overwhelming, seeming, wow, it's too complex to even set up, manage, or use. Obviously, this goes back to key training on top of what you're actually expecting the technology to do and the outcomes you're wanting from it, and then the actual use of the system itself. But many times it's because there's this notion that, and something I alluded to earlier, of falling or not understanding that mindset shift. Back to the earlier question, it's not saying historical things don't matter, but it's the historical things we found are really not working. That's why we've put this new technology in place to help us enable us to do something new and to find out more from that data. Another thing about that word complex there is that a lot of times the technology can only surface the complexity that could exist in something that's already there, meaning it'll surface it. Sometimes it surfaces the ugly things that come surface to the top, because that data exposes things that aren't working, or gaps in a process, or maybe you have those sales reps that are really closing the deals and others that are not. Well, data is going to expose that. The complexity of not doing things can be surfaced. And what do I mean by that? The complexity is that now you have to untangle and undo things that were bad practices or bad things in your operations that need to be changed and shifted. Back to that mindset shift. We used to operate this way. Now we need to operate this way in a more modern sense, and more information coming in. Our traditional way wasn't working. And we found that it isn't working because it was exposed. So we have to untangle this complex mess of ugliness and get it to a streamlined framework that we can operate upon. So it's only as complex as it's meant to be. But again, it does need some good training on top of this technology and actually using the systems that are put in place.
Thanks, Aaron. Vaishnavi, you want to add anything to this, or?
Sure, Anisha. Just quickly, I'll add my perspective. I think Aaron covered it very well, and it's just that because there's so much new technology out there, to adapt that into the organization, you have to cover up some gaps, data-related gaps, the way an organization handles their data, and the way they train their sales reps to work with these tools. So that is a big task, yes, and the concern is definitely valid. And I guess when you talk about complex, maybe the concern, I think, could be that sales tech stack is becoming very crowded, and in some cases that sellers are overwhelmed with tools. But interestingly, this is actually somewhat the reason why this market has shifted now to more consolidated tools. These unified execution platforms are making execution simpler. Everything is more connected, everything is happening in one place, and sellers don't have to switch between different tools. So it's actually more actionable for frontline teams. And tech stacks are getting leaner actually, because everything is happening in one platform itself. So that is the future. So complexity, it's a valid concern, but then again, with a strong foundation, a lot of these complexities can be resolved easily.
So ideally, I think we can say that it's going to get more complex with the market getting more crowded, but for a good need, I believe, right? So as we come towards the end of today's session, I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for joining us and being a part of today's discussion. Well, a special thanks to Umang, Aaron, and Vaishnavi for sharing your perspectives and your practical perspectives on how revenue leaders can shift from passive visibility to execution-led predictability. And to all our attendees, thank you for your time, thank you for your engagement, and thank you for your questions. Do stay updated to our latest research, insights, and upcoming webinars. Do follow us on LinkedIn at 𝐞𝐚𝐭 and visit our website to stay updated to all the upcoming webinars that we have lined up for you. We look forward to having you join us in our future sessions. Once again, thank you so much and have a great evening.